Hello and welcome back. This is Gertrude Mache again, best-selling author of the book, How to Write a Book in 40 Hours. Now, a lot of you know that I've been sharing a lot of valuable content online to help self-published authors sell their books. Well, today I have got a very, very big surprise and a gift for all of you out there who have written your books or are writing your books and thinking about how you can market and promote your books online. I have best-selling author Naresh Vissa, who is based in New York. Is that correct, Naresh?
No, I'm actually now based in Florida, but I'm coming to you from Texas for the holiday weekend.
Fantastic. Welcome. Now, you have written an interesting book about podcasting, and you're going to share some amazing tips that authors can use to create a successful business online, selling their content and their intellectual property. What is the title of your book, Naresh, and where can people buy it?
So thank you, Gertrude, for having me on first off. And the book is called Podcastnomics, the book of podcasting to make you millions. It is all about the podcast process. It's everything you need to know about podcasting from soup to nuts. So how to set up a podcast, all the way to how to make money off podcasts. The book is available on Amazon. It's available in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook versions. The official website of the book is podcastnomics.com. And the book sat for about a week, or for 1 week, it was #1 on the Amazon bestsellers list in various categories. And it still continues to be in the bestsellers list as well. So it's doing well, and I'm pleased with the reaction so far.
Fantastic. So as an author, I am very, very curious to find out better ways that I can sell my books and sell my content. I would love you to take me through a step-by-step process on how I could create my own podcasts and, like you say, make millions from it. So take me through.
Yeah, so podcasting, it's actually pretty simple and cheap to get started. What you need is the equipment first, and some people, for some reason, they think they need to be in a studio and spend all this money on microphones and headsets and all that. You can actually buy all the equipment you need on Amazon. It costs about, assuming you have a Mac computer, if you spend another $200 on a good microphone, which I recommend in the book, or I recommend several in the book, and a headset and a audio recording software, and there are free ones available, but there are better paid ones as well, you are ready to get up and running on setting up your podcast. What you'll need to do after that is then have a hosting service. So just like you need a hosting provider to host a website, your podcast also needs to be hosted somewhere. And so I recommend several places like SoundCloud, Libsyn. There are a few others that provide hosting services so that you can publish your podcast and create an RSS so that you can distribute it on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Player.fm, and several other distributors. But that's the quick answer. It's a little more complex than that. The book walks readers through how they can go about setting up and creating their podcast. But assuming that you have a strong computer, you're looking at a minimum $200 to $300 investment. Sorry, I should say a maximum $200 to $300 investment, and then you can get up and running to launch your podcast. And I do want to say that. Well, I want to say really quickly that podcasting has really taken off because of the ease of use. It's now much simpler to podcast than it was 10 years ago when the iPod came out, and now there are more and more people who are giving it a shot.
Okay, so I guess my curiosity would stem from, once you've got all the equipment, how do you generate a following around your content? What ideas can you share with my authors in terms of getting people interested in your content?
Absolutely, that's a great question, and that really is the key to podcasting and building up a brand for yourself. So the first thing I want to say is make sure there's so many podcasts out there that just kind of post their episodes on a website and that's about it, or they just post their episodes on iTunes and that's it. But what you need, it's so important. Every podcast needs its own dedicated website. That's the first thing. So you're going to post
So say that
MP3.
again. Every podcast needs its own dedicated website. So you're saying one has to
Yes.
register a URL and have a page for every single podcast?
Yes. Well, when I say podcast, so a podcast is another term for the name of the show. So every podcast, so if you have one podcast, should have its own website, and then within the podcast you have different episodes. So every week you can release one
Okay.
episode, for example. So if I come out with a podcast called Podcastnomics, the Podcastnomics show, I would want to make sure that I have a website called podcastnomics.com where people can visit and download the episodes, find out more about me, maybe read some transcripts that I put on there of episodes, and do some other cool things. You'll be surprised at how many podcasters don't have websites. What they do is they just publish straight to iTunes and they neglect the website part, and that hurts them when it comes to search ranking, Google SEO, and really trying to take advantage of the online space. Now, the second thing I want to say to grow your audience is the other side, which is making sure that your podcast is available on iTunes. iTunes created the podcast ecosystem, and because of iTunes, as many people know, there are so many Apple users now across the world. So many Apple users. And now, if you have the latest iOS update, that means that every iPhone, every iPad, pretty much every Apple device comes with the podcast app. And the podcast app, so it comes with a podcast app, and the podcast app houses all these different podcasts. So that means if you have a podcast and you're publishing on iTunes, then all those users who have an iPhone or an iPad or whatever it might be, that's app, and it makes it that much easier for them to find you. So the first thing I said is having a website. Second thing I said is being on iTunes. That in and of itself will market your podcast heavily, because Apple does a lot of marketing for new podcasts and for podcasts that are getting a lot of downloads and listens, and then the website will help with Google search. Now, the third thing I want to say.
So tell me something before you go on.
Sure.
How do you monetize? How do you capture those people who are listening to your podcast? What kind of an ethical bribe can you give them so that they give you their email address and you can build your database?
That's a great question. So you just got into what I was going to talk about next, which is the email list.
Okay.
The goal with the podcast is, once you have a loyal set of listeners, you want to get them on your mailing list. And so to let your viewers and listeners know, not only do you need a website for your podcast, but you absolutely need a newsletter or a mailing list that you're going to send out every time a new episode is published. And the way that you're going to convert all that original traffic of people listening to your podcast, what I found to be most effective has been giving away something for free to your listeners. So, for example, if I have a show about investments and investments that will help people better manage their retirement savings or portfolios, then what I would do is on my podcast, I would tell people, visit my website at www.xyz.com, and you will see an email opt-in box that is marketing a free report on the 5 best investments you need to own in 2015. And so I would tell people, this is a really special report. Normally I would sell this on Amazon for $5, $6. The value that you're getting from it is much greater, because these investments are poised to take off. Simply visit the website, type in your email address, and I'll send you that report and those 5 investments for 2015 to your email inbox and you'll be good to go. So that's just an example. What you want to do is give away something for free. You want to provide something of value to the listener so that they will go visit the site and enter their email address.
Okay, so you mentioned the newsletter. So you're constantly going to have to be generating content for a newsletter. How long does a newsletter have to be? What kind of content do you think you should include in your newsletter as well?
So when I say newsletter, I actually don't mean the brick and mortar term of newsletters. The email newsletter, I use it as a synonym for the mailing list. And the only emails that we're going to be sending out through this newsletter are going to be the podcast episodes. So if a new episode is published 1 week, then I will send out an email to the mailing list saying, latest episode is up. We interviewed Gertrude to talk about book publishing, and then I'll have some show notes that talk about what the discussion was about, the tips that Gertrude gave, and click here to listen now. People can listen to the entire episode. So that's another easy way for people to get on the mailing list. Anything else?
So it's really low maintenance then in terms of generating and keeping your listeners engaged and listening. Is that correct?
Yes. So the great thing about podcasting is once someone hits subscribe either to your mailing list or on iTunes, if they hit the subscribe button, there's a very good chance that they're going to stay with you for a very long time. And this is because with podcasting, the people actually find you. They somehow found you through the internet or through iTunes or through whatever it is. They went out of their way to hit that subscribe button so that they can get episodes from you every week or every day, depending on how often you publish. That's huge because the quality of that lead is so incredibly strong. And as a result, even if you only have 500 podcast listeners, that you might think, oh, well, that's nothing, because in traditional terrestrial radio terms, if you have 500 listeners during drive time, well, that's not very good at all. And Clear Channel or whichever radio station will say this is very pathetic. But with podcasting, if you have 500 listeners, think of that as speaking somewhere at a conference and having 500 people intently listening to you with the doors closed and taking notes. That's what you're doing.
So what you're basically saying is that it's not about numbers. It's about having a warm list, a very intimate experience with your listeners. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yes. Podcasting is a very, very intimate form of communication. So most podcasts are uncensored, unedited, and the listeners really, really get to know the host because the host is really talking in an intimate manner with them.
And can you respond back to their queries? How do your listeners engage with you during a podcast or after?
Sure. So I talk about this in the book in depth. It's so important that podcast hosts and production team, if there is a production team, frequently engage with the audience, whether that's taking questions via email or social media. So using Twitter effectively. All podcasts not only need to have a website and a mailing list, but they need to have a social media presence, a Facebook fan page, a Twitter handle, Instagram account, all these different things so that users can go on and engage with them. And it's important that the podcasters respond back either on air or through these social media. So I think every podcast should have a Q&A section or a Q&A segment where they read questions from listeners and they answer the questions. So if the show is about book publishing and how people can become better book publishers and marketers of their books, then there should be a Q&A where people can ask questions and the podcaster would respond back with their answers on air. That creates excitement with the audience. It gets them involved. It builds brand loyalty, and it also gives you great content and topics to discuss with your audience.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So what else? What is the next step from there? So you've told us 3 things so far. I'm really wanting my authors to start thinking about how they're going to start engaging with their audience.
Sure. So the next thing you want to do when marketing your podcast is, and this would be this is very beneficial. It's not hard to do, but it's posting your podcasts on YouTube as well as iTunes and TuneIn and Stitcher. So YouTube is known as a video platform, whereas all the other
Yes.
Distributors I talked about are audio. What you can do is take your podcast MP3, put a still photograph over as your still photo, and create a video and just upload it onto YouTube. So people might be wondering,
Okay.
well, why would I want to put it on YouTube? Well, YouTube is to video just as iTunes is to podcast. So there are hundreds of millions of people worldwide who use YouTube for anything and everything. And what that will do is what that does is it again distributes your podcast to a wider audience. You never know who's going to find it or what nugget of information you have in your podcast that someone could find very beneficial. And so there have been countless times when I've worked with clients, they posted something on YouTube and it got picked up by Reuters or the Associated Press because something that was said in that podcast somehow set off some indicators or some markers, and the podcast ended up going viral. And once that happens, then that's how more people can find your podcast, and that's how you can build up your following even more. So that's another tip, and another one which is so important. And I see that this is what you do with your businesses, but you want to interview experts on your show. So if your
Yes.
podcast is about cars, if it's about car maintenance, you want to interview executives at major car companies, at GM or Ford or any other car company. You want to interview authors of books who have written a lot of content and who know a lot about this space. And the reason for this is, number one, it builds up your credibility. It builds up your show's credibility. Hey, you have the chief communications officer of a major car company on your show talking about their latest product. That builds a lot of credibility. And also, the more important thing is after that episode is recorded and published, the search is huge. So now when you Google that person's name, your podcast might come up on the first or second page of the Google search listings. And secondly, you send them the episode, and they'll be excited to share that episode with their network and with their followers. So let's say you interview a best-selling author of a book on cars, and they've sold 50,000 copies of their book, and now all of a sudden you interview them on your show. They share that show episode with their mailing list, with their Twitter and Facebook followers. Then all those people are going to listen to that podcast, and now they've discovered you and your show. And I can't tell you how many podcasts I have discovered just by following someone on Twitter or Facebook or being on their mailing list, and then that individual sent out an email or posted something saying, hey, I was on this show, it was a great interview, this is what we talked about. I found so many podcasts that way simply because that's how the subject of the interview got me introduced to the podcast. So that's so important in the hot market itself.
So how long should the podcast be? How long should you engage people? You don't want to go on and on for too long and be boring. Well, what would you recommend?
That's a great question, and this is really a more of a human psychology type of answer. People have a short attention span. The attention spans are getting shorter. I don't have the exact data in front of me, but it's available in the book. And I recommend that no show should go over 1 hour. Um,
Okay.
1 hour should be your absolute cutoff. And the other thing is, if you break up your shows into segments so that there are different dynamics in your show, then that'll help keep listeners more engaged. And what I mean by that is you could do the first 20 minutes of a 1 hour show with banter, just talking back and forth with your co-host about whatever's on your mind. Then you can have a second segment, which is that guest interview that I discussed earlier. You interview an expert for 15 to 20 minutes, and now you have a completely different dynamic. You get someone else's perspective and view on this subject topic. And then the third segment you can have is a Q&A session where, as we discussed earlier, you're taking questions from your listeners, you're reading them on air, and you're answering them. And you could spend an easy 15 to 20 minutes just doing that, and then you wrap up your podcast. But I definitely recommend that 1 hour be the maximum for your podcast.
Fantastic. So is there anything else you would like to add in terms of tips and ideas for authors?
Yeah, so I want to shift over from podcasting to publishing because I wrote the book Podcastnomics, and the book hit #1 on the Amazon, various categories on the Amazon bestseller list. And I didn't just publish the book and sit back for a month and do nothing, just go to sleep for a month, and it became #1. That's a process in itself to really market the book and to rise it up the rankings. So I did Reddit AMAs, Ask Me Anything discussions with folks about podcasting, what it is. I answered questions people had there. That generated some sales.
Can you go back and explain how Reddit works?
Sure. So Reddit is a message board where people can post or ask questions, or not even ask questions, but post anything they want about any topic, and then people respond to it. So, for example, it sounds so simple, and it is, but it's now one of the most visited websites on the internet. So, to give you an example, if I went to Mexico and I was kidnapped by some Mexican drug cartel. Well, let's say I somehow got out, I came back to the United States, I'm alive. I can go on Reddit and I can post, I got kidnapped by a Mexican drug cartel, ask me anything. AMA is the abbreviation. And so then Reddit has a community of millions and millions of users worldwide, will then ask me questions about my experience being kidnapped in the Mexican drug cartel. And it's just a completely community-driven organization. And so with my book, Reddit has a special section dedicated to just books, to authors and books that they release. So I held 2 different AMAs, one for the book section and another for the general Reddit section, which includes everyone. And I held these AMAs to discuss my book, Podcastnomics, and answer questions about podcasting, how to make money off it, what podcasts I listen to, etc. Now, what that did was it gave people who had an interest in business or marketing a completely different perspective of digital marketing and digital content and content marketing. So that helped drive some sales. So Reddit was very beneficial to me. I also did some media interviews, not anything major, but I did some smaller niche blogs, podcasting blogs, digital marketing blogs. They interviewed me, or they wrote articles about how podcasting is growing. So I did some media there. I used social media pretty effectively to market my book. So I used Twitter to let my followers know. I used Facebook to let my friends know in my own personal network. And I also used the Facebook groups. I was in several Facebook groups dedicated to podcasting. And so those groups already had people who were qualified and who are either podcasters or who are interested in podcasting. And I let people know in those groups, hey, I released my book. Here it is available on Amazon. I ran special promotions to market the book. So I gave away the book for free for a few days. I also, after those few days were over, I sold the book at major discounts. I tried all sorts of price testing to see which prices worked best, which prices didn't work. And then doing interviews like this with you has certainly helped. And the number one
Okay.
thing I would say that I've done, which really helped the sales of my book, I found a mailing list of that consisted of podcasters. And so I contacted the person who ran the website that had the mailing list and
Okay.
and and asked if I could rent that list from them to sell my book, and they said no problem. They actually had never taken an advertisement before because they never tried. They just, I guess they weren't really business people, and so they said, yeah, sure, no problem. So I wrote them a check, and I sent out an email with my book, or telling people to buy my book and some other marketing copy, and that really I mean, really instantly, within 24 hours, I sold hundreds of copies because of that list that I rented out.
I
So
guess because it was so specific, and
right,
that was your target market, right?
exactly, yep, that
Yes.
was my target market, and that helped so much.
Huh. Interesting. Wow, the world is flat these days because of the internet and the ways that we're communicating, correct?
You're absolutely right. The world is getting flatter and flatter. Things are going to the things are becoming more digital. So working now doesn't, gone are the days of walking into an office and working in that office cubicle. That's slowly kind of weeding itself out. And when it comes to content, same thing. You don't really need to watch TV or listen to the radio anymore. Everything is online, and this is just the beginning. There's so much in store for us now. There are going to be so many changes. Podcasting has only been around for about 10 years, and now it's finally hit an inflection point, and will be taking, or will be going up to its next level. So I'm confident about that, and not just podcasting, but publishing. Same thing, book publishing. There are more books being published now than ever before, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. People are also reading now than ever before because of all the publishing that's going on.
Yes. Yeah, that is fantastic. So I guess what I would love to see from you next is a step-by-step how a business or an author or a speaker can implement all of these amazing things that you have shared. I'm hoping that will be your next ebook, and then I can help market and promote that, because I have a lot of authors who are eager to learn how to be effective online in terms of selling their content.
Sure, no, you're absolutely right. And writing books and publishing them on Amazon and iTunes and Barnes and Noble, etc., they add a great deal of credibility to a business. So I have a client right now, for example. They don't really have a marketing director or anyone, so they retain my services, and I gave them the idea that you just mentioned of writing a book about what their business is about, their industry, and how it works, and they're all over it now. They don't know why they didn't think of this earlier, and they didn't know it was so easy to do. And yes, you
Yes.
are absolutely right. It just adds so much credibility, and it's a great way to drive traffic and increase business, increase sales, revenue, and for a relatively low price. Publishing a book is not an expensive thing, just like starting a podcast is not an expensive thing. You might as well just give it a try and see how things go.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. So thank you so much, Naresh. Just tell our listeners again where they can buy your book and the title so that they don't miss out on this amazing opportunity.
The book is called Podcastnomics, the book of podcasting to make you millions. It's available on Amazon. It's also available on its dedicated website, podcastnomics.com. I can be reached you can just Google my name, Naresh Vissa, and find my website, nareshvissa.com, and you can contact me through there. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just type in my name, and you'll find all that stuff, LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And I wish everyone much success in whatever endeavor they're pursuing.
Thank you so much for this interview, Naresh. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, kid.
Bye.